Nathan Calloway had always been the odd one out, even in the eccentric world of evolutionary biology. With perpetually untamed hair, mismatched socks, and a penchant for muttering under his breath, he looked more like a distracted art teacher than a scientist. But he had one thing going for him, a relentless curiosity about how life adapted to the world around it. His tiny lab was tucked into the corner of a crumbling university building, its windows perpetually fogged with condensation from the aquariums, terrariums, and humidifiers crowding the space. He liked it that way. It felt like a jungle. On any given day, Nathan could be found hunching over a microscope or jotting equations onto the nearest available surface, including, on occasion, his own ARM. It was a Monday when everything changed. Nathan didn't particularly hate Mondays, but they did have a knack for springing unwelcome surprises. That morning, he'd been tinkering with Franklin, his pet lizard and longtime lab mascot. Franklin was nothing special, a run-of-the-mill anole, green and lazy, whose only remarkable feature was an inexplicable taste for strawberries. Nathan had been adjusting a high-tech microscope to study Franklin's skin when the lizard decided to leap from the table, knocking a tray of samples into the air. Nathan lunged to catch the reptile, his hand colliding with the tray in a spectacular cascade of broken glass, spilled chemicals, and startled squeaking, "Damn it, Franklin!" Nathan yelped, clutching the lizard against his chest as he surveyed the mess. He sighed, setting the unrepentant creature back in its terrarium and muttering, "You're lucky I don't charge rent." The rest of the day passed uneventfully, or so he thought. It wasn't until the next morning, when Nathan shuffled into the lab clutching a coffee mug and glanced at Franklin, that he noticed something strange. The lizard's color was different. Not the usual green, but a deeper, richer shade, almost like a rainforest leaf. Its eyes seemed sharper, its movements more deliberate. Franklin scurried up the glass wall of the terrarium with an ease Nathan had never seen before. Then it hit him. The tiny nicks and scratches Franklin had sported for months were gone. Nathan set down his coffee and leaned closer. "What did you do, buddy? Sneak into the steroids?" He carefully opened the terrarium, letting Franklin climb onto his hand. The lizard's scales felt smoother, almost unnaturally so, and when Nathan raised him to eye level, he swore Franklin's gaze held an unnerving intelligence. A ridiculous thought bubbled up in Nathan's mind, and he dismissed it with a laugh. Evolution didn't work overnight. And yet, he spent the next several hours analyzing Franklin, running every test he could think of. The results were mind-boggling. Franklin's cellular structure had undergone subtle but profound changes, enhancing traits that would help him adapt to his environment. Nathan couldn't wrap his head around it. Evolution through natural selection was supposed to take generations, not hours. It wasn't until Nathan caught sight of the bruises on his own hand, where Franklin had scratched him during yesterday's chaos, that an idea began to take shape. A ludicrous, impossible idea. That afternoon, he tested his theory on a pothose plant in the corner of the lab. After brushing his fingers over its leaves, he whispered, "You'd do better with a little more light, huh?" The results were subtle at first. By the next morning, the plant had grown thicker, sturdier stems, and its leaves had started shifting toward the direction of a window it couldn't previously reach. Nathan's heart raced. Was this real? His hands had started to tremble, and not just from the gallons of coffee he'd consumed. He spent the rest of the week experimenting, moving from plants to insects, then to lab mice. Each time, the results were the same. Whatever trait he mentally nudged seemed to manifest. By Friday, Nathan was giddy with excitement. He'd unlocked something unprecedented, something that could change the world. But his enthusiasm was tempered by a creeping sense of unease. If his touch could rewrite the genetic rules of life itself, what else could it do? Elena Torres burst into the lab like a whirlwind, her long black hair tied in a practical ponytail and her sharp brown eyes narrowing at the cluttered space. "Nathan," she said, folding her arms, "I don't know if you're aware, but the fire marshal nearly had a stroke when he saw your lab last week." Nathan glanced up from a row of terrariums, where he'd been observing a group of ants develop new behavioral patterns. "Oh, hey, Elena. What's up? What's up? She repeated, exasperated. You're supposed to give a lecture in 10 minutes. Did you forget again? Nathan groaned. Of course I did. Elena watched as he scrambled to gather his notes, papers flying everywhere. What are you even working on in here? It smells like a rainforest and a biology textbook had a love child. Nathan hesitated, torn between secrecy and his growing need to share his discovery. Finally, he said, okay, but you have to promise not to freak out. Freak out? Elena arched an eyebrow. You're not cooking meth back here, are you? Just watch. Nathan grabbed a houseplant from the windowsill, a sickly fern with yellowing fronds, and set it on the table. He brushed his fingers over the leaves and said, "You could use a little boost." Elena rolled her eyes. You're talking to plants now? That explains a lot. But then the fern began to change. Its yellowed leaves deepened to a healthy green, and new fronds unfurled, vibrant and robust. Elena's jaw dropped. What the hell? She whispered, leaning closer. It's me, Nathan said, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. My touch, somehow, I can influence how things evolve. Elena stared at him, then back at the fern. That's impossible. That's what I thought too, Nathan admitted. But it keeps happening. It's not just plants. I've done it with animals. Traits that would take generations to develop, I can trigger in hours. Elena sank into a chair, her face a mix of awe and apprehension. This could change everything. Nathan grinned. Exactly. Imagine what we could do: fix food shortages, restore endangered species, even combat climate change. But Nathan, Elena said, her voice serious, this is dangerous. Evolution doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you push one thing too far, it could throw entire ecosystems out of balance. Nathan hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. I know, he said quietly. But if we're careful, if we test it properly, it could be the solution to the environmental crises we've been fighting for decades. Elena didn't respond immediately. She looked at the transformed fern, then at Nathan, and finally sighed. You're lucky I believe in miracles, she said. But you need to be careful. No shortcuts, no rushing in blind. Nathan nodded, grateful for her support. Careful is my middle name, he said, though they both knew it wasn't true. The following months were a whirlwind. Nathan and Elena worked tirelessly, refining his methods and documenting their results. They started with small-scale projects, crops that could thrive in harsh conditions, trees that absorbed more carbon dioxide, coral that resisted bleaching. The successes were undeniable, and word of Nathan's work began to spread, but not everyone was thrilled. At a prestigious scientific conference, Nathan presented his findings, complete with before and after photos and live demonstrations. The audience was a mix of astonishment and skepticism, with one figure standing out, Dr. Evelyn Graves, a renowned evolutionary biologist with a reputation for tearing apart bad science. After Nathan's presentation, Evelyn stood up, her expression sharp as a scalpel. This is reckless, she said, her voice cutting through the applause. You're tampering with processes you barely understand. Evolution is not a toy. Nathan bristled. I'm not treating it like a toy. I'm offering solutions to problems that are destroying our planet. And what happens when one of your solutions backfires? Evelyn shot back. You think nature won't push back? Every action has consequences, Dr. Calloway. The debate escalated, drawing the attention of scientists, politicians, and media outlets alike. Nathan's supporters hailed him as a visionary, while critics like Evelyn warned of ecological disaster. The backlash from the conference hit Nathan harder than he expected. He had anticipated skepticism, that much came with the territory, but the outright hostility blindsided him. The internet lit up with articles, debates, and furious comment threads. Some headlines hailed him as a potential savior, the man who could save evolution. Others were far less kind. The genetic madman. Is Nathan Calloway the new Frankenstein? At first, Nathan tried to ignore the noise, burying himself in work. But the more he read, the more it gnawed at him. Evelyn Graves had become his most vocal critic, appearing on talk shows and writing scathing op-eds about the dangers of unregulated evolutionary interference. Her arguments weren't baseless, he couldn't deny that. But her relentless campaign made him feel like a criminal instead of a scientist trying to help. Still, the work continued. Elena's cautious optimism helped steady him, even as her own doubts occasionally bubbled to the surface. They focused on developing projects with immediate, tangible benefits. In one rural farming community, they introduced a drought-resistant crop that flourished despite weeks without rain. In another, they revitalized a dying river with plants that filtered pollutants from the water. Each success brought a flicker of hope, and Nathan clung to those victories like a life raft. The turning point came with the coral reefs. For years, scientists had been searching for ways to combat coral bleaching, a devastating effect of rising ocean temperatures. Nathan's gift seemed tailor-made for the problem. With Elena's help, he developed a strain of coral capable of thriving in warmer, more acidic waters. When they tested it in a small, controlled section of reef, the results were stunning. The once bleached coral came alive with vibrant colors, and fish returned to the area in droves. The media caught wind of the breakthrough, and suddenly, Nathan was back in the spotlight. Environmental activists lauded the project as a beacon of hope. For a brief, blissful moment, it seemed like the world might be coming around to his vision. Then the corporate interests got involved. Nathan received a call from a representative of a multinational biotech company, Biosphere Solutions. The man, smooth and impeccably polite, congratulated him on his success and invited him to discuss potential partnerships. Nathan was wary but curious. Funding was always tight, and a corporate backer could mean scaling up their projects to make a global impact. Elena warned him to be careful. "They're not philanthropists," she said. "They'll want something in return." "I know," Nathan replied. "But if they can help us do more good, isn't it worth it?" The meeting took place in a sleek glass conference room overlooking the city skyline. The executives were all smiles and handshakes, offering Nathan a dazzling array of resources, state-of-the-art labs, teams of researchers, unlimited funding. In return, they wanted exclusive rights to his coral technology. Nathan hesitated. Something about the deal felt off, but the promise of resources was tempting. He asked for time to think it over. Over the next few days, Elena dug deeper into Biosphere's history and uncovered a troubling pattern. The company had a reputation for monopolizing technologies and pricing out competitors, often to the detriment of local communities. When Nathan confronted the executives, their polished veneer cracked. They downplayed Elena's findings and tried to pressure him into signing. Furious, Nathan walked away from the deal, but the encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. He realized that not everyone who praised his work cared about the planet. Some just saw dollar signs. The fallout from rejecting Biosphere was immediate. The company launched a smear campaign, accusing Nathan of recklessness and unethical practices. Their influence extended to the political sphere, where certain lawmakers began calling for restrictions on his work. The pressure was mounting, and Nathan could feel the walls closing in. Then came the algae incident. It started with a small project designed to clean up polluted waterways. Nathan had introduced a strain of algae engineered to absorb heavy metals and other toxins, intending it to be a short-term solution for contaminated sites. But something went wrong. A mutation, one he hadn't anticipated, caused the algae to reproduce faster than expected. Within weeks, it had spread beyond the test area, choking out native plant life and disrupting aquatic ecosystems. The news broke like a tidal wave. Videos of slimy green blooms clogging rivers and lakes went viral, accompanied by headlines like, "Calloway's Catastrophe." Environmental groups that had once supported him turned their backs. Governments scrambled to contain the outbreak, and Nathan found himself at the center of a global crisis. Evelyn Graves wasted no time. She appeared on every news channel, her voice sharp with righteous fury. "This is exactly what I warned about," she said. "Unchecked, unregulated experimentation. Callaway's arrogance has put entire ecosystems at risk." Nathan was devastated. He knew she was right. He'd pushed too far, too fast, and now the world was paying the price. But he refused to give up. If he'd caused the problem, he would find a way to fix it. He reached out to Evelyn, swallowing his pride and asking for her help. To his surprise, she agreed, though not without a healthy dose of skepticism. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing it for the planet." Their uneasy alliance brought together some of the brightest minds in biology, ecology, and environmental science. The solution they devised was risky, a counter-evolving agent that would suppress the runaway algae. Nathan's ability would be critical in guiding the agent's development, but the process would require precision and control. The operation to deploy the agent was a logistical nightmare. Teams of scientists and environmental workers coordinated efforts across multiple countries, battling time and public panic. Nathan joined one of the field teams, determined to take responsibility for his actions. As they worked, he and Evelyn clashed repeatedly. She challenged every decision he made, questioning his motives and methods. But over time, her hostility softened. She saw the toll the crisis had taken on him, the sleepless nights, the weight of guilt, and began to understand that his intentions, at least, had always been genuine. The counteragent worked, but the damage was already done. It took months to restore balance to the affected ecosystems, and some species were permanently lost. The experience left Nathan shattered. He retreated from the public eye, moving to a remote cabin where he could reflect on everything that had happened. Months later, Elena and Evelyn visited him with an unexpected proposal. They had been working with a coalition of scientists and policymakers to establish an independent, global oversight committee for projects involving Nathan's ability. The goal was to ensure that future applications were carefully regulated, with input from experts and local communities. Nathan listened quietly as they explained the plan. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. He agreed to contribute, albeit in a limited capacity. He would use his gift only under the committee's guidance, ensuring that it was a tool for collective progress rather than personal ambition. Before they left, Evelyn handed him a photograph of the restored coral reef. "You did this," she said. "Despite everything, you made a difference." Nathan visited the reef a few weeks later, diving into the crystal-clear water and marveling at the vibrant ecosystem thriving below. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was a start. As he surfaced, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had spent so much of his life trying to reshape the world, but now he understood that redemption wasn't about control. It was about balance. The story of Nathan Callaway's gift would become a cautionary tale, a reminder of both humanity's potential and its hubris. But for Nathan, it was also a story of learning, of humility, and of hope. Nathan stood on the deck of the research vessel, his wetsuit still damp from the dive. The evening sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull provided a rare moment of calm. The restored coral reef stretched below, teeming with life. He could almost hear the vibrant ecosystem whispering its thanks. He watched a school of parrotfish dart through the water, their scales catching the fading sunlight. It was hard to believe this was the same desolate patch of ocean he'd visited months ago. It had been a battlefield, a proving ground for his ability and his resolve. Now, it was a symbol of what could go right, if only he remembered the lessons learned along the way. Elena approached him, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "You're going to turn into a coral yourself if you keep staring at it," she said, handing him a mug. Nathan chuckled, taking the coffee with a grateful nod. "It's hard not to," he said. "I still can't believe we pulled it off." She leaned against the railing beside him, her gaze softening as it followed his. "You and your gift did this, Nathan. Don't let the guilt of what went wrong overshadow what you've made right." He took a long sip of coffee, letting her words sink in. The guilt hadn't left him, it probably never would, but her reassurance carried weight. Elena had been there through everything, her voice often the only one keeping him grounded. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nathan said, "Do you think the committee will actually work? That people can be trusted to handle this responsibly?" Elena hesitated. "Honestly? I don't know. But I do know that it's better than letting governments or corporations fight over control. And it's better than putting all that responsibility on you." He nodded, watching the first stars appear. Sometimes I wonder if I should have kept it to myself. If maybe this gift wasn't meant to be shared." Elena turned to him, her expression serious. "And let the world keep falling apart while you stayed hidden?" "No, Nathan. You didn't ask for this ability, but you're the one who has it. Hiding wouldn't have saved anyone." Her words lingered as the night deepened. He knew she was right, but the weight of what had happened, the lives disrupted, the ecosystems altered, still pressed heavily on his chest. It wasn't just about what he could do, it was about what he should do. And that line had become harder and harder to define. The next day, Nathan packed his few belongings and prepared to leave the research vessel. The cabin was waiting for him, a quiet refuge where he could step away from the chaos of the world. He wasn't retreating, at least, that's what he told himself, but rather taking the time to rebuild, both the environment and his own sense of purpose. Before he disembarked, Evelyn Graves found him in the lab. She had a clipboard in one hand and her signature no-nonsense expression on her face. "You're really going through with the cabin plan?" she asked. Nathan looked up from his duffel bag. "I need the space. Time to think." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And to avoid people?" "Maybe that too." She set the clipboard down and crossed her arms. "You know, I've spent most of my career believing people like you were the problem, scientists who think they can outsmart nature, who meddle in things they don't understand. But I'll admit it, you proved me wrong." Nathan blinked, caught off guard by the admission. "That almost sounds like a compliment." "Don't get used to it," Evelyn said, though the corners of her mouth twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "What you've done, what you're capable of, it's extraordinary. But it's also dangerous. I hope you understand that now." "I do," he said. "Believe me, I do." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because the world doesn't need another hero with a god complex. It needs someone who knows how to listen." Nathan watched her leave, her words echoing in his mind. For all their clashes, he'd come to respect Evelyn deeply. She was the voice of caution he hadn't known he needed. The cabin was exactly as he remembered, modest, tucked away in a dense forest, surrounded by the hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the world's noise faded into the background. Nathan spent his days hiking through the woods, sketching wildlife, and occasionally jotting down notes for potential projects. But mostly, he just existed, letting the quiet work its way into his soul. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, his phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Call me when you're ready. We're making progress." Progress. The committee had been forming for months, a fragile alliance of scientists, environmentalists, and policymakers from around the world. It was Elena's passion project now, and she'd kept him updated despite his self-imposed exile. He stared at the message for a long time before dialing her number. "Nathan," she answered, her voice bright with excitement. "I was starting to think you'd gone full hermit on me." "Not quite," he said, smiling. "What's the progress?" Elena launched into an explanation about the committee's structure, the oversight measures they'd agreed upon, and the first projects they were considering. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and for the first time in months, Nathan felt a spark of hope. "So," she said after a pause. "What do you think? Ready to join us?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, the fireflies glowing faintly in the distance. "I think I need to take it slow. But yeah. I'll be there." Over the next few years, Nathan worked with the committee in small but meaningful ways. He was careful, deliberate, and always mindful of the mistakes he'd made. The projects were collaborative, each step scrutinized and debated to ensure balance and sustainability. One day, he returned to the coral reef, this time with a group of young scientists eager to learn. As he guided them through the vibrant ecosystem, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. This was what it was about, passing the torch, inspiring others to care for the world as deeply as he did. The journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, disagreements, and moments of doubt. But there was also progress, and Nathan held on to that. He couldn't change the past, but he could help shape the future. As he stood on the reef, watching a sea turtle glide gracefully through the water, he realized that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a process, one that required constant effort and humility. And for the first time in a long while, he was at peace with that.